Okay. Ezra, what do we have over there? Renan. Shalom, shalom. We're continuing on the laws of Shechita, laws of, we started yesterday, and we'll continue to talk about the animals that you do Shechita on. It's a few laws. Open up the Vayikra. Everybody have a Chumash? Vayikra, chapter 22. Vayikra 22, what page?
That would be page. Vayikra 22?
Yeah.
100.
Vayikra 22, 228.
Chapter 2, verse 27. 230. Page 230 in this edition.
Chapter? Which chapter?
Chapter 22, verse 27. Lord spake unto Moses, saying, when a bullock or a sheep or a goat. Want to read it for us, Asher?
When a bullock or a sheep or a goat is brought forth, then it shall be 7 days under the dam.
That means its mother.
Yeah. And from the 8th day and henceforth, it shall be accepted for an offering made by fire unto the Lord.
Keep going.
And whether it be cow or ewe, ye shall not kill it and her young both in 1 day.
Okay, so here we have two mitzvot. Mitzvah in the first pasuk is that if you're going to bring a korban, the animal can only be brought as a korban on the 8th day from birth, not for the first week. And the second mitzvah is that you're not allowed to, you're not allowed to slaughter a mother and her child on the same day. So the first one, let's start with the first mitzvah first, and then we'll talk about the second mitzvah. The first mitzvah seems pretty clearly that's only if you're going to bring a korban. But if you're not going to bring a korban, like nowadays we don't have sacrifices, so theoretically you could take a young calf or a young goat, and the day it's born, you can slaughter it, and it would be kosher. And that's true, that the mitzvah only applies that you have to wait until the 8th day if you're going to bring a korban. However, there is the custom even today to wait until the 8th day, not because it's of this mitzvah, but because we have to be sure that the animal is viable, that the animal is alive, and from birth, sometimes it has to be full term for it to be halachically considered to be a status of a newborn. Full term is, for babies, it's how many months?
6 months?
9 months. Human babies is 9 months, but for goats and sheep, it's 5 months. It's 5 months. But we're not sure exactly when they got pregnant, and so 1 week here, 1 week there, we delay the sacrifice for the slaughter, for a week until the 8th day, just to make sure that the animal's not a stillborn. Also, you want to be able to check it that it's not, doesn't have any diseases and so forth, it's not a treifa, so we try to do that first as well. Okay, so that's about the first mitzvah of waiting until the 8th day. So we said it really only applies to sacrifices, but that's the common practice to wait until the 8th day anyways nowadays. So you don't take a newborn in that day slaughter. The second mitzvah doesn't say that it has anything to do with the korban, and so that applies today as well, that you're not allowed to slaughter a mother and its young on the same day. We're not quite sure why the Torah says this. Probably it has something to do with cruelty. The Rambam says that in Moreh Nevuchim, and the Ramban also mentions it, that it's perhaps a little bit to teach us at least, not that it's cruel to the animals necessarily, they're not so aware of what's going on, but to teach us to be sensitive to not show cruelty in our lives. So we sometimes feel that it's destroying a whole family at once is worse. And so to this day, in most slaughterhouses, they actually have separate days for slaughtering young animals and older ones, because just in case one of them, the older one, happens to be the mother of, we don't necessarily know. That's so, how do you know? If you see that, okay, there's a young newborn that's following a mother that's nursing, so usually that's a good sign that she's the mother and and the baby's the baby. But you don't always have that, especially later on, and you don't know, so we try to separate it. That's the common custom.
And these apply only to cow and eagle, right? Not.
Yeah, it's interesting. It does say that explicitly. In other words, it's only behemot and not chayot. Behemot, we said the 3 out of the 10, which the Torah lists, 7 of them are chaya, the wild animals. And let me just double check that, whether it applies. Yeah, it says it only applies to the animals, to the domesticated animals, and also it doesn't apply to the wild animals, nor to birds. It doesn't apply to birds either. Although if you do find some chicks or eggs on the tree, you got to shoo away the mother bird. But that's a similar sort of halacha here. But this prohibition of that also applies to the father, but you never really know who the father is. If the mother, she's nursing, you can tell the baby, and that's why they separate nowadays. They separate all the adults, not also the males. They don't do slaughter on the same day for the older parents and the young, which could be their kids. And it doesn't matter whether you do one or the other first. It has to be the same day. The day is defined as a halachic day from night till the following night, like Shabbos. And so you can theoretically do a shechita on the mother, for example, before sunset, and the young after the stars come out. That is technically allowed. But as I said, you usually don't do shechita at night. Now, if you buy an animal, and the owner knows that he sold someone else the young or the mother in order to slaughter it today, then he should tell them, listen, I just sold the mother. Even if it's not you're not the owner of both. You're not allowed to slaughter one or the other if the other one's being slaughtered that day. And so there's actually the owner has to tell them, be careful about that. And there's 4 times a year that we can assume that the previous buyer who bought the animal is going to slaughter it that day. Not he's buying it for, he's going to keep it on his farm for a couple of days. The 4 times a year are the Erev Pesach, because everybody's getting ready and slaughtering for the festival. The Erev Atzeret, the Erev Shavuot. Erev Shmini Atzeret also. Apparently this was a very heavy day for slaughter. And Erev Rosh Hashanah. Those are the 4 times a year that you, the seller has to tell the buyer, the buyer of the second animal, whether or not he sold it that day. Because we can assume that whoever bought it is going to be slaughtering it that day. And that's why, by the way, in some big communities, some rabbis said, don't do any slaughter on Fridays. Any Friday. Not only those Erev Yom Tov, but any Friday. A lot of people do slaughter for this again. Nowadays we think that meat grows in styrofoam and plastic, right? In the butcher shop, it's frozen. It comes from but in the day when you actually would buy. By the way, when I was in Uganda, I went for a wedding. I had a student from Uganda. We got married, and one of the wedding gifts someone brought. I have a picture of it somewhere. 2 little goats. Well, that was a gift for the wedding. Beautiful wedding gifts. So in a society where people are more farmers and more connected, this halacha could be more relevant. Yes, Ezra. Go ahead. I did. I flew into Entebbe. Yeah, that's where the major airport is. I did. From afar. They don't let you in unless you have a special permission. But you could see, it's the old terminal. The old terminal, you could still see the bullet holes from, yeah, it's very
What
cool.
about the bomb shells that Israel threw?
So I didn't notice specific, holes in the wall or anything like that, but I did see it was pointed out to me, this is, the famous airport that was attacked in Entebbe by the Israeli, paratroopers or whatever they were, the special unit that went to save the hostages. Very cool. In any case, the goats.
In the case of the
Young
waiting
goats.
In the case of the waiting period, that you said that we don't do, or maybe you're saying we do because of the korban. Isn't there a risk, because if you kill that animal on the second day, because you say we don't do sacrifices, there's a slight possibility, but nonetheless a possibility that it could become puzzle after the fact because the temple might be there, sacrifices could be restored, and any of those animals you've eaten within the past week would after the fact be puzzle.
Right. You're confusing two things. First of all, there's two mitzvot. The first mitzvah is you have to wait for the 8th day. That's what we said is only applicable to sacrifices. Okay?
Right, that's what I'm talking about, though.
Oh, okay. So what about that? So we wait for the 8th day.
We don't do it.
We do. We do it, but not because of that mitzvah. We do it just because we want to make sure that it's fully formed, that it's had the full, it's come full term. So we still wait for the 8th day. And in terms of the mother and child, that we do, that mitzvah applies even today. And practically, that's why they separate off. But the wedding present, it's sort of like I got for my bar mitzvah a bond. Someone brought me a bond because it's going to bear, interest over time, and so. Maybe it's the beginning of his flock. He's starting off, I don't think he was going to take that little goat and slaughter it the next day, but it's like giving somebody something that's going to grow, an investment, basically. Okay, another question somebody had? No? Oh, yeah, David, yeah?
Yeah,
Are you a farmer? Are you growing cattle? Do you buy cattle? Is that why you're... You have in the past. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. You can't remember it now? It's all right. Yeah, it'll come to you. Let's move on to the other mitzvah. There's a third mitzvah, and this time I want you to open up Vayikra 17.
Oh, I remember
Please,
now.
please.
My question was about not permitting the slaughter on Fridays. Wouldn't that be self-defeating? Because then Thursday's going to become the big day everybody's doing all the slaughter on.
Right. I guess if it's not on Friday, then they would spread it over the week. Some people will do it Monday. Friday was the day. So the assumption was that would be more of a danger. Chapter 17 in Vayikra.
There's no chapter 17.
Yeah, there is. It's 2:18,
Leviticus.
2:16, 2:17.
Oh, perfect. Pasuk 13.
2:17.
Page 217. Thank you. Why don't you read it for us, Ezra?
Alright. And he shall put the incense upon the fire for the Lord, that the cloud of the incense may cover the covering that is...
It's not the right verse. This is a mistake.
120.
Yeah, don't give me pages. What's the chapter? What's the...
It's 17, 13. Chapter 17, verse 13.
Yeah. Page 220. That was 16, Ezra. I think you got that. That's okay. 220 here. Verse 13 is 220.
And whatever when there be of the children of Israel, or the strangers in the sojourn among you, which hunted some venison on any beast or fowl that may be eaten,
Venison,
he should even pour out the blood thereof and cover it with dust. For it is the life of all flesh, the blood of it is for the life thereof. Therefore I said unto the children of Israel, you shall eat the blood of no manner of flesh, for the life of all flesh is the blood thereof. Whosoever eateth it shall be cut off, and every soul that eateth that which died of itself, or which was torn with beasts.
Okay, those are already different mitzvot, but the mitzvah we're looking at now, we've already talked about nevela and treifa. That was the verse 15, but verse 13 and 14 is about the prohibition of eating blood, and 13 is that you've got to cover the blood, right? It says you've got to you spill the blood and you shall cover it. Cover it with dust. So we practice that mitzvah. It only applies to chaya and oaf. And they're the non-domesticated. Birds, it's true, a lot of birds are domesticated. The chickens definitely are usually grown, sometimes even inside the houses. But because they're kosher birds, it consists of a lot of kosher birds, which are also free range, wild. And so they're included together with the chaya and the oaf. And
Turtle doves can go to sacrifices, can they not?
yes. I actually fulfilled this mitzvah when I was about a 10-year-old or something like that. Where I was, my teacher took us to the park one day, and he brought a shochet and some chickens.
That's awesome.
And he shechted the chickens, and we each got our opportunity to take some earth and put it on top of the blood. Yeah, I remember vaguely, not very bad, but that after the shechita, the chicken still ran around with its head cut off.
If we bring you some chicken, would you give
It's
us
a
the same
reflex.
Are you gonna shake,
I'm not a shochet. In any case, before you do the kisui adam, you make a bracha. You cover you say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kitshanu v'tzivanu v'tzivanu al kisui hadam ba'afar, about covering the blood with earth. And you have to take some earth and you have to cover it. Really, you're supposed to cover it below and above. And that's why a lot of people in the shechita, in the slaughterhouse, they have earth floors, because that way the blood will fall on the earth, and then you just cover it up on top. But if you have stone floor, so then you should really sweep or squeegee the blood towards someplace where there's earth, and then put the earth on top. And you do the best you can. It depends on the circumstances, but ideally you're supposed to be covering on the top and the bottom. And it's usually we wait a little bit. We don't do it immediately, because after you shecht an animal, you check. You check the knife. We saw that yesterday. You check the knife to make sure that there's no nicks in it. After 1 or 5 or 100 shechitas that you've done, but the knife has to be checked afterwards to make sure that there's no nicks. And also you check the animal. Sometimes you check that there's there's no hole in the lung, for example, and when it comes to big animals, and other checks to make sure that there's no blemish, because if it's not kosher, if the animal turns out to be not kosher, there's no mitzvah to cover it over the blood. Some people say a little bit, maybe why is this mitzvah, where does it come from, covering over the blood?
When they cover the blood there.
Actually, no, the behemot in the Beit HaMikdash, there's no mitzvah of kisui adam. Maybe for the ofot, there's a mitzvah of kisui adam, but only for chayas there kisui adam. But it's true that the floors of the temple were not, they were stone floors, so that wouldn't work for that in any case. Some interpretations say that it's a little bit of a symbolic gesture to say that we are embarrassed. We're a little bit embarrassed that we're steeping to eating animals. And ideally, we spoke about it a couple weeks ago, that there's this thesis that vegetarianism was up until the Noach came out from the flood. Only then does it say that God blesses man that he can eat from the flesh of the animals. Before that, it just says that he was supposed to eat the plant life. And so we're not on the level yet where we don't eat meat, and therefore we cover up the blood. This is one idea.
Does it have to be done on an individual basis, or can it be on a collective basis?
It can be collective, yeah, it can be collective. After you have a few animals that have been slaughtered, then you do the kisui adam and all of them together. That's usually the way it's done. You don't do it one by one. But again, okay, question. Yes, Renan. Yes.
Isn't there a
1 second, Renan first. Yeah.
Well, in the 14, also 11, say that, for it's the life of all flesh, the blood of it's for the life of horse, for the life of all flesh is the blood. And also 11, for the life of the flesh is the blood. And I have given it to you on the altar to make the atonement for your souls. For the blood or the blood that will make atonement for the soul.
Yes.
It means,
It's a good question. What does it mean?
Like
Somehow the Torah says that the blood contains in it the life force of the animal. Blood is the soul. That's the expression of the Torah. The blood is the soul. What does that mean? I don't really know.
Only blood
Yes.
can redeem a person?
Specifically, listen, a person needs the circulatory system, and an animal needs a circulatory system to survive. But it also has the breath. It has a respiratory system as well as a circulatory system. So, but for some reason, the Torah chooses and says specifically, blood is symbolic of life, and the blood is considered, and that's why you're not allowed to eat the blood, because the blood is supposed to be used to atone on the altar, but not for eating. Also, the context.
Here you say that to make atonement for your soul.
That's because part of the sacrifices was when you take the blood and you sprinkle it onto the altar.
Only the blood can do atonement for the soul?
That part of the sacrifice has to be done. There's different parts of the process. Part of the process is putting the flesh. Some sacrifices, the limbs are burnt on the altar. Some sacrifices, the blood is put in one way. Sometimes the blood is put in a different place on the altar. Then there's the inner, what's it called? The inner parts of the animal, the inner parts, the intestines, the guts, right? That also has to be washed out and put in a bowl and taken up to the altar. So there's a lot of different processes of bringing sacrifices, but the blood is one of them. Here, the Torah singles it out and saying that the atonement comes only after the blood has been sprinkled on the altar.
Nowadays, there is no blood. The altar.
There's no altar. There is blood, but there's no altar.
The blood, the altar, all this process. So there is no atonement?
Correct. We don't have sacrifices to bring atonement. Instead, we daven. And we still do tshuva, but we don't have a process of atonement like we had in the days of the temple. We have the 1 day of atonement, and there's other things that the Torah says can bring you atonement, but not sacrifices.
But how this is connected to the tshuva?
Tshuva is a key ingredient in achieving atonement. The Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, is known as the Day of Teshuvah. It's a day designated for tshuva. Tshuva brings about atonement, perhaps in parallel or in an equal way to these sacrifices. We don't have the sacrifices. All we have left is the tshuva. There used to be two components. Together with every sacrifice, a person would confess and do tshuva if it was a sin offering. And so we don't have the offering itself, we still have the tshuva component. So it goes together. But specifically, the Torah speaks about the blood being the symbolic of the soul. And I was going to say that there's one more element here of not eating the blood, which we find in other places in the Chumash. For example, take a look at Dvarim 12. Dvarim 12, verse 24.
Page 358.
357, actually. Oh, maybe you're right.
Yeah, 2020 on top of 358.
The bottom of page 357 in verse 22, it says, chapter 12, verse 23. Be sure that thou eat not the blood, for the blood is the life, and thou mayest not eat the life with the flesh. Thou shalt not eat it. I'm now in verse 24. Thou shalt pour it upon the earth as water. Thou shalt not eat it. Verse 25 again gets repeated. That it may go well with thee and with thy children after thee, when thou shalt do that which is right in the sight of the Lord. So the verse gets, the mitzvah or the prohibition of eating blood gets repeated and doubly repeated in Dvarim, in Parshat Re'eh. I was going to say something else though, that there's another pasuk, I can't find it right now. Maybe it's the next verse.
So it's like
1 minute, 1 minute, let me find it for you. Maybe I can find it. Yes, I think I found it. No, I can't find it right now. Anyways, there's another place that the Torah explicitly speaking about not slaughtering in the field and making sacrifices in any place. And the association is with Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah, of course, they would slaughter animals as part of their worship. And we do that, but only in the temple in Jerusalem. And apparently there was some worship surrounding the blood itself. I mean, all these cults still have drinking blood is a big part of I think it's some Indian cultures. I'm talking about Native Americans when I say Indian, not from India, but they don't touch the animals. But the concept of drinking the blood, I think a lot of culture is associated with imbibing the spirit of the animal and sort of getting the power. Ooh, yeah, that's right. That's right. So we don't drink blood or wine of but that kind. Sorry.
Some eat it as a delicacy.
A delicacy.
Well, essentially,
Yeah.
we agree with them on that. That it is the spirit of the animal. It's just that whether you should be imbibing it that we disagree on.
Right, and the association with Avodah Zarah, I think, is key here. That the Torah says you have to cover the blood. You can't, take it and do worship with it. You have to respect it. The blood is it's like when you bury a person. It's a sign of respect. So burying the blood of the wild animal and the birds is also saying that we're, of course, perhaps maybe even embarrassed to be eating the animals, but we do treat them with respect and we cover it. We definitely don't do any avodah zarah, not worshiping any other. There's also all sorts of spirits associated with the blood, and we're not worshiping them. So I think that's connected to this mitzvah. But I'll take questions. We're going to go around the room. Everybody will get a chance. Conclude that idea, okay.
If we take transfusion, but if we donate,
donating blood is a big mitzvah, yeah.
If we need to get we are absorbing the life of that person, or there's something like that, or if we're getting a part of the soul, or I don't know, how this can work in the spiritual.
It is interesting. The Torah does say that the life is, the blood is the life. We don't take that beyond what the mitzvahs say. The mitzvah says, therefore, you're not allowed to eat it, and you have to cover it. It doesn't say, though, that you become the person if you were to drink it. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that.
Let's
And
about marriage. When you do relations, you became one flesh.
right. There's definitely liquids being transferred, but and linked in a very physical way.
Yeah.
So listen, my brother donated a kidney to somebody he didn't know, just to be a giving person and to save their life, essentially. Ultimately, when you have kidney troubles, you're on dialysis, and it really, besides quality of life, eventually you die from it because you need a working kidney. And this fellow who received it, he didn't have a working kidney, and so he saved his life, essentially. So his kidney, his actual physical body organ, is in somebody else. It's we talked about it the other day in a different class. They try. It's a mind experiment. What happens if you transplant? You have person A. Okay, so he gets a kidney transplant, and then he gets a heart transplant, and then he gets a brain transplant. Who is the real him? Who is he? All right. There is such a concept. Conceptually, though, The question is, what constitutes you? Who are you? Are you your bodily parts? The brain, your memories, obviously, is a little bit more complicated because you could be in a different person's body, and it's very strange. It's not such science fiction nowadays. These things are becoming more and more possible. But in any case, we don't usually go there when we get to blood transfusions, and giving blood is a big mitzvah, and the fact that your blood is in somebody. Absolutely, yes. It's a big mitzvah, yes. Yeah. Right, yeah. Okay, we'll go around the room. There's other questions here.
A couple of points. It's interesting. Animals have a soul. They've got a nefesh. But correct me if I'm wrong, they have a nefesh, we have a nefesh, but we were created in Hashem's image, and animals are not. And it seems like that's the separator. Is that kind of
Yeah, it's hard to define. They're all words that we use. You've learned some Chabad, I understand, right? And the Tanya speaks about every human has an animal soul and a godly soul, right? So we have
really.
Yeah. And of course, on the face of it, it's true physically. We eat and we reproduce and we breathe, and in many ways we're like animals. But we have some things, hopefully, some of us more than others, we have some features which distinguish us from animals, and that's what makes us uniquely human. It's hard to put your finger on and say exactly. You call it a soul, call it an animal soul, call it a nefesh, ruach, neshama. There's a few words for soul. So.
And then it's interesting on covering the blood. There's that phrase that Yehuda uses. Hey, let's not kill Yosef.
And cover his blood. Very good. We find that's a little bit of a precursor. This is fascinating. We find it in a number of stories in Bereshit that later on devolve or somehow get expressed in a mitzvah. Right? That Yaakov and the two wives eventually becomes you're not allowed to have two sisters as wives. And this mitzvah of Kisur Adam, there's the mitzvah of Yibum, of course, Yehuda and Tamar. Later on, there's actual mitzvah that if a man dies and doesn't have any children, then his brother should take the widow as a wife. A number of interesting mitzvot where we find the parallel story, and we have to each one try to figure out what's going on here. Is there just a replay, or is it somehow a fixing of a concept which is existence in human civilization and society, and like we said, that the Yibum by Yehuda, he was the father-in-law. We don't have that anymore. The father-in-law is not involved. He's not allowed to sleep with his daughter-in-law. It's just the brother of the deceased that has the mitzvah of Yibum. But regarding Kisui Hadam, it's interesting that it is mentioned when the brothers were contemplating killing their brother Yosef. And so it could be that there's a hint in this mitzvah to cover, although we're not killing anybody here. We're killing an animal and a wild animal. But maybe the covering of the blood is to remind us to be nice to our brothers. It could be that there's a little bit of a hint here.
And then going further with that, it's interesting, the verse that talks about don't eat the blood, the very next verse, if I'm not mistaken, talks about don't kill people, don't murder.
I don't know. We just saw them. I didn't see anything about killing people here. I'm sorry.
Is it Bereshit 9, 4, and 5?
That.
Different location.
It's a different location. We didn't see that. That's in general. It says you're not allowed to kill people there, and if you kill someone, you're guilty. You're liable.
Yeah.
Right. We learned the Vayikra and Dvarim. We didn't look the pasuk in.
So I think in the pasuk
in Bereshit.
Bereshit 9:4.
Let's take a look. Everybody have Bereshit 9:4. Yeah. What are you showing us?
9:4 don't eat blood, and 9:5 don't kill people. If I recall correctly.
Oh.
What page? Page 14. Right, already to Noach coming out of the ark, God tells him here that he's allowed to eat animals for the first time. But he says, but already there, do not eat the animal with its life. Basar bin nafsho damo lo tuchelu. That's Ever Mina Chai, that's a limb of a living animal. It doesn't really say not to eat the blood. It says don't eat a limb of a living animal which has life in it. And the way it says it has life in it is by saying that it has blood in it. But it doesn't say not to eat blood.
Interesting.
And then the next verse is, don't kill each other. And I will.
But it's interesting that they're conjoined there. They're right next to each other.
Killing animals and killing humans. Yes. Eating the flesh of a living animal and not taking the life of others. The blood is definitely used as the image. Shedding man's blood is the way it's described, killing. And he will be, by man shall his blood be shed, right? It seems like divine retribution. If you kill somebody, you will be killed. For in the image of God made he man. Maybe so that image of God is connected to the blood, you're saying? Specifically, blood is somehow an expression of the image of God?
Yes, the blood of man has the image of God.
Interesting.
But the blood of animals doesn't.
Okay. Interesting.
I don't know. I just something.
Good thoughts. Yeah, good thoughts. It doesn't actually speak about the prohibition of eating blood, though, or covering the blood. It speaks about killing and eating from a live flesh from a live animal. That's the simple meaning of the verses. Okay. Someone else, Hirsch. Yeah.
So you said, what was the reason that it's necessary to cover the blood of an animal?
I don't know. And we mentioned that some people explain that it's a symbolic expression of our embarrassment and a little bit of expressing that we're sorry we're not at the highest moral level that we could be, and maybe we should be one day, that we won't be eating animals anymore. Okay?
Why do you do it for some animals then? How can that even be a reason if you only do it for some animals?
Right, so the why it only applies to some animals and not the other ones, it could be because the animals, the domesticated animals, you're giving them their food. And maybe you deserve to eat them because you're taking care of them. Whereas the wild animals, they're taking care of themselves, so there's no reason, you have no claim to be able to use their flesh. And so there might be a little bit more of an expression needed of something being unworthy. But at the end of the day, we don't know any of the reasons for the mitzvot. We're giving our best attempt at an explanation. But
I want to confirm which animals do we have to cover blood for versus not?
Anything that's not, it's easiest to say, the three for which you don't have to cover the blood. That's the cows, the sheep, and the goats. Those are considered domesticated animals. Any other type of kosher animal is considered to be pretty much a chaya, and you have to cover the blood. Okay?
We eat
But poultry, meaning it's not like you don't raise poultry.
Right, so we said before, the poultry is sort of like an exception, that's the one type of bird which we do domesticate, but it gets overwhelmed by the majority of birds, which the Torah lists, the kosher birds. It actually says it lists the non-kosher birds because all the rest are kosher. So there's so many kosher birds. Of course, nowadays we don't practice that, but essentially there are no end. They're all kosher birds, and so the one type of bird that we do domesticate still has the halacha that you have to do the kisui hadam, even though it's an exception.
So
So
the only animals that we don't cover its blood when we slaughter it is if it's been domesticated, so like the sheep, the goats, and the cow.
Correct.
Everything else we must cover.
Yes. Okay, we're gonna have to stop here because there's another class coming. So
will we eat meat in the Messiah and when Mashiach is here?
I don't know. If the temple is reconstituted in the way we know it, then we will. Because there's sacrifices that we have to eat. It's a mitzvah to eat.
Oh, then we will.
Yeah, it makes sense, but we don't know. We'll stop here, Bezrat Hashem. Continue tomorrow.